It must be 10 o'clock someplace. 10:04. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Fiscal Committee to order. And we have one item on the agenda today. So Representative Lynn has a motion.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we take item FIS 22404 off the table and accept the replacement that has been provided.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Senator Bradley. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Thank you. Okay. It's probably best that we have a motion to accept the replaced item, and then we will have discussion. Thank you.
Second.
All right. We'll need a roll call on this. Yeah, the motion is so that we can begin our discussion. Okay. Actually, I think we can just do okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay. I would like to call Commissioner Caswell forward.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Taylor Caswell, I've got Mark LaLiberty with me. Here's our broadband program manager.
Perhaps you could
Sure.
go through the replacement item and
I wanted to start by thanking you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for scheduling this special meeting and making the trip down here for today to consider this item. I wanted to just take a quick moment to give you a little background on how we have gotten here today. To date, the history of broadband expansion in New Hampshire, particularly in rural areas, has been one of frustration. Despite a well-known need in these communities to access an internet that becomes a more necessary part of everyday life with each day that passes, there has been a lack of progress made for many years. Local select boards, broadband committees, planning agencies, and others have been unable to garner the resources necessary to make investments in high-speed broadband. A major reason for this has been the fact that many areas of the state, particularly in population centers, have excellent broadband coverage and have for many years. Federal funding agencies have seen this and interpret it as a state that looks largely served. This has resulted in most funding that has been made available nationally being sent to other states, largely in the South, with large percentages of their populations without any service at all. Just a few years ago, 20% of Mississippi had no internet access in areas of their state. On the ground here in New Hampshire, this has caused many efforts to expand broadband to lose momentum and has resulted in massive service disparities, effectively creating a system of haves and have-nots. From my perspective as someone charged with advancing our state's economy, this is an untenable situation. Even before COVID, we had large portions of our state population without access to a major tool for working, learning, accessing healthcare, and financial management. During and after COVID, these tools have become even more the norm, and continued disparity is impacting our economy and making us less competitive. Then in 2021, the state was awarded $122 million to expand the reach of our broadband infrastructure, funds that would enable us to finally answer the call from these communities. This moment in time is an opportunity that we have never seen before, nor do I think we will see again. The opportunity we have to provide access at scale statewide is one we cannot pass up. When we received these funds, we set a goal of moving quickly and efficiently. We designed a competitive $50 million statewide program that sought to get broadband service to the most number of unserved and underserved locations, in the quickest and most efficient way possible. We have accomplished that. Under round one of this program, we will be bringing service to 23,000 locations at a cost of $2,100 per location. That rate is the second lowest cost per location of any state, and construction is already underway. Our request today is to enable us to bring that same success to a second round, aiming to bring at least 15,000 more new locations online, this time for $40 million, enabling this work to begin immediately upon completion of this process. In addition, our item today includes an accept and expend request for the next part of our broadband work. This $25 million request will fund the first round of the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative, or BMGI, that is designed to fill out areas that are not addressed under the Broadband Connect program, and we are requesting to use the remaining $25 million of the Capital Project Fund under this item, and at the same time committing to use another $40 million of funds we are due to receive under the IIJA, the federal infrastructure legislation enacted in November of 2021. I cannot understate the degree to which access to broadband has become a central part of the state's economy. Making these types of investments will pay off literally for decades and put New Hampshire in a position to compete in an economy that is increasingly accessed over the internet. Small businesses, large manufacturers, remote workers, families, and the elderly are all finding more and more ways to be productive, to do their business, and to stay healthy by using the internet. Communities without it will be left behind, perhaps never to make up that ground that could be lost. So once again, thanks for this opportunity, and Mark and I are here to answer any questions you might have on the item.
Thank you. Are there questions? Representative Leishman?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Commissioner Mark, for appearing. So a number of us have had questions, and some of them haven't been answered yet. I checked with Mr. Kane just a few minutes ago, and I'm still kind of waiting on questions that I've had for at least a week or two. And I know Mark and I tried to connect via the telephone, but we're never successful. The concern I have is we're not following, if you will, the law that we established to make sure that as many possible communities could get service. And we've gone this route that's kind of bypassed the process that was so heavily debated as far as the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative. And I know, and I appreciate that you brought that back with the $25 million today, but I've heard from so many people prior to our special meeting and prior to our last meeting when we tabled the item that they've tried repeatedly. I'll take the town of Hancock, for instance. It's just north of Peterborough. They have areas that have dial-up still. They've made, I think, 2 separate applications for funding and been denied. What assurances, because you just told us that you see 15,000 new hookups, if you will. That doesn't seem like an awful lot. So are the people in Hancock, are they going to have any possibility of getting service, or are they going to be pushed back on another burner, or other communities up north? Because it just seems that this hasn't been rolled out that well. We're still looking for maps. We've asked repeatedly, how do we stand? Where are the areas that have service or no service? I know you've got several different definitions of underserved, and that still says that people within those areas do have some sort of broadband, but it doesn't say who doesn't have anything or has dial-up. So that's a question I've been putting forward for weeks about where are the areas that have nothing? Have those been identified as priorities? And I can't seem to get an answer.
So you got a lot there. Let me try to get at some of those, Representative. So with regard to BMGI, I think it's important to point out that we had to make some changes to that legislation in the previous legislative session in order to make the program align with the program rules for the Capital Project Fund, the federal money that we were going to use to fund the BMGI program. And so Mark and the team in our broadband office worked with legislators to come up with a number of changes to the previously enacted BMGI statute in order to make those accommodations, one of which was to change the match to a 75% match on the side of the state for that program. We achieved that at the end of the session last year in July and immediately went to JLCAR to start the interim rules process, which we actually completed just prior to our last fiscal meeting. So as far as the standpoint from where we are, that is very much within the schedule that we have been pursuing, which has been to get BMGI in position to be utilized with the funding and the substantial funding that we have available to us under Capital Project Fund and ultimately under the IIJA, and to use those funds to effectively backfill the program of the Broadband Connect program. The Broadband Connect program has been put in place in order to effectively get to those low-hanging fruit, let's call it, places in the state that have had long-term difficulty in getting service for high-speed broadband and broadband service generally. So the competitive process that we used identified those areas, and we're now hitting 23,000 different locations in how many different communities?
73 communities, 6 counties, all north and west.
In 73 communities around the state. So as part of that process, we recognized that there were still some areas that we could get with this program, with the Broadband Connect program. And so we initiated a second round that we are asking for the accept and expend today to mirror those results. BMGI is a program that will be a partnership between providers, internet service providers, and local communities to identify places literally like at the end of cul-de-sacs within their communities, within their regions, to jointly make that application to continue the the buildup of a sustainable broadband infrastructure within the state. So I think it's important to recognize that this is all part of a long-term strategy with a significant amount of resource that gets us in a place to be able to set a foundation of reaching communities that just frankly have not been touched for many years in a substantial way. Get those online, use the Broadband Connect program to build up, the BMGI program to build up the areas that would be not covered under the Broadband Connect program. All said and done, by the time we spend $122 million under this program, plus at least an additional $100 million that we are expecting under the IIJA program, that should be a very resilient broadband infrastructure network for the state.
I'll follow up if I could, Madam Chair.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So you just struck a nerve with me. You said that you're going to try to touch those areas that haven't been touched. Do you have a list of those communities that will be touched under this program? Like, again, I'll use Hancock, for instance, because I'm more familiar with that. Are they going to be touched by this program?
I don't know specifically if Hancock was in round one. We have just received the applications for round two, so I wouldn't be able to say at this stage what the towns are that would be under the winning awardee. But I having reviewed the applications of round one, we did not see a significant amount of overlap in a lot of those applications. So I would expect that we will see new communities in certain areas of the state that would be covered under round two. And then again, we still have the BMGI program that will be coming behind that.
I'll let someone else go next.
Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd say that if we accept this item, we will have spent all but $5 million of that 122 million. And I'm just wondering why you're holding back that 5 million. Is it a requirement or?
Well, it's a combination of things. We've also funded the mapping program, as you'll recall. There might have been one other program. Yes, so to continue some assistance with a consultant that we'll be having an RFP for shortly, and then the administrative costs of the department. So paying Mark and his team.
Are there further questions? Senator Bradley?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So, a couple of things. um, I really appreciate the fact that you've accelerated the BMGI funding to put $25 million into it. I think that we'll have a better chance of reaching those areas of the state that may not have been touched with round one, and who knows exactly the winning bidder of round two. So I think that's vitally important. So I appreciate that. To me, that was one of the bigger problems of the fiscal committee consideration 2 weeks ago. We've talked about this, privately, but can you talk a little bit more about the IIGA funds and where they are, when we can expect them, and how guaranteed they are? I think that's a critical component.
So I'll start and I'll ask Mark if he has anything he wants to add on this. But I do think that that legislation was enacted just about a year ago. And the federal government is in the process of deploying resources under that fund. There have been resources that have come to New Hampshire through New Hampshire DOT. The funds that are specific to broadband are under what's called the BEAD program. Those funds are due to become available probably by the second quarter of 2023. So again, in terms of the timing that we're looking at working with here, having the rules in place, being able to launch the first 25 million using the funds that we already have in hand, and then anticipate a point when those funds would be exhausted, pull another $40 million from that IIJA program.
Further?
Yes, follow up?
Thank you very much. So, in the BMGI legislation, when I first introduced it, it was a 50-50 grant. Then I think it was Senate Bill 445, that was Senator Hennessy's bill, that a number of us co-sponsored. It changed, as you noted, to 75 to 25%. But the question that I have, and we've again talked about this offline, there is a requirement under BMGI that there be a provider match, whether it's municipality or the provider, and most likely the provider. And what you've indicated to me is that as round two progresses, and as it goes before the governor and council, there'll be a requirement that there be at a minimum a 25% matching commitment by the provider. Is that correct? And
That's correct. Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, so the answer to that is yes. Lastly, there's been, I think, questions that have arisen out of round one and duplication of services. BMGI was meant to try to get internet to areas of the state that had no service. So the question that has arisen is the duplication, if you will, and how are you going to verify the addresses of where, the wires are going to be installed?
Mm-hmm. So a number of ways as we go through the review process for round two. We consult a number of different sources, including the FCC mapping data that I think has been discussed previously. I do think that by itself is not a sufficient amount of address level specific data to be able to sufficiently meet the needs under the Capital Projects Fund. And so, for example, that process, the FCC 477 mapping, really goes only down to the level of census block, which, as you know, in New Hampshire is often a very large geographic area. So effectively, if there is service in that census block, they check the box that's an area that has service. I think our experience on the ground is that's not always necessarily the case. So again, it tends to overstate New Hampshire's served population, and by itself is probably an inadequate tool. I would note on a side note there that as a result, several states, including New Hampshire, are going to be petitioning the FCC to seek ways to improve those mapping tools that they have available for us. So in order to overcome this, we will be working, as we have in the past, to review all the addresses that are submitted under the RFP on round 2 with the applications and with others. We will be partnering with the communities that have done a significant amount of work in identifying served and unserved areas through their own processes, whether it's a bonding process or whatever other process they might have. And we also will be conducting spot testing to identify the speed and reliability in areas where there is currently existing services in order to make sure that they are meeting with the capital project fund standards.
I guess this is as much comment as anything else. And I think a tribute to the chair, who's worked with myself and Commissioner Caswell to make what I believe is a much stronger presentation now to the Fiscal Committee with the commitment to move forward with the next $40 million of funding that I think I am relatively assured now is going to happen. The 25% contract matching grant, and the it'll be a process over time of the verification of addresses, but those are all very helpful, and obviously moving up the BMGI into this proposal I think is very helpful. So I would hope, Madam Chair, that we can vote for this and be on our way.
Thank you, Senator Bradley. Representative Irf, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Caswell. So I've been trying to get this question answered since prior to our last meeting, and I thought it would be a very simple question to ask. But how is it that the intent of RSA 12-0:63, Roman numeral 2, isn't to require that federal broadband funds be controlled by the RSA's 12-0:61 to 63? And if you're not familiar with those, they're essentially the broadband initiative sections.
So can you just repeat your question for me?
Yes, sir. How is it that the intent of RSA 12-0:63 Roman numeral 2, which is the one that talks about putting the funds into the BMGI fund, it talks about putting broadband funds into the BMGI fund, isn't to require that federal broadband funds be controlled by those same RSAs?
So looking at 063, you establish the broadband matching grant fund. The fund shall be kept separate and distinct from other funds and shall be continually appropriated to BEA for the purposes of the subdivision. Any federal funds received by the state for purposes of expanding or improving internet access that are not otherwise committed to other programs or required by the federal legislation authorizing the funds shall be deposited into the broadband matching grant fund. Is that your question?
That's the RSA I'm referring to, yes.
And specifically, what about that language?
Authorizing the funds shall be deposited into the broadband matching grant fund, which I assume is the BMGI fund we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. So for the purposes of expanding or improving internet access that are not otherwise committed to other programs.
So the not otherwise committed to other programs is that's what you're suggesting is the out to not
I don't
put them in
consider it
there?
an out.
Well, whatever, that's what you're going by.
I consider that is the authorization for us to run the Broadband Connect program as well as BMGI.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
Thank you for that.
Certainly.
So I just want to clarify this in my mind. The understanding is that a law drafted in 2021, which is when HB 2, which is the law that we're talking about here, was drafted and signed into law by a combination of actually SB 85, but SB 85 didn't come into effect. The understanding that was drafted in 2021 during a time when it was unclear what federal restrictions would apply to a distribution of broadband funds included a clause that intended to give whichever state agency would oversee the distribution of funds broad discretion to ignore the law as drafted and do what they chose with the funds, as opposed to the clause, that same clause we're referring to here, being included as part of the effort of the drafting of that legislation to not lose the federal funding due to an inconsistency between federal and state laws. And as I'm sure you're aware, in other areas of that law, there are specific references to of trying to avoid that problem.
Did you want to say something? I'm gonna let Mark talk a little bit about this issue. He's been more.
Hi there. Thank you for the question. So when we read this again, any federal funds received by the state for the purposes of expanding or improving internet access that are not already otherwise committed to other programs. That is why we are here. I think for us, other programs are this program, the RFP process. And that was why it was so important. And we have said this back in 2021. We said this during the 445, SB 445, and why we went to fiscal in July to approve round one is to get those funds, as we say, committed to other programs. So we've been open about saying, okay, these are how we're going to utilize these funds and put them into these programs and get the approval of the proper entities, both fiscal and governor and council.
One more follow-up.
Yes, please.
Thank you for that. I actually did try to read through the Senate minutes from, I believe, the meeting you're referring to regarding SB 85 from 2021. Could you just refer me to where you raised those issues at that meeting?
We actually raised it at February 1st, 2022 during the Senate Bill 445. The whole process is when we received this funding, we got this information for this funding for capital projects. That was in September of 2021. And actually, as we were reading drafts in the final bill for infrastructure, it was clear that we wanted to make sure that when we had broadband matching grant initiative ready to go, that the funding source, that the funding and the law itself could coincide. Plus, there was also an ask about the changes in the match, and that was from both municipalities and ISPs that reached out about that. So that's why we went through that process. If you remember at the time, when we went through this process, there was going to be a commitment of an X amount of money into the broadband matching grant initiative. During that process, we were clear that we wanted to be able to have the flexibility to utilize those funds, but in exchange, we would come to fiscal and governor and council for anything that we decided to do, what programs we wanted to move forward with. So that was during the conversations in February of 2022 for the amendment.
Thank you very much for that. I really wish I could have gotten that information a month ago when this whole process started so that I would not have been put in this position, but thank you.
Representative Lynn, did you have a question? No. Okay.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Senator Khan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think that passing this today provides some clarity to towns that have committees up and running that are trying to follow the guidance that we've provided and might have broadband bonding and town meetings coming up where an action today will help that overall communication throughout the state. I think that's important. I also think that understanding, because we won't reach all of the need with this allocation, with this proposal, and that with the promise that there is more coming through a defined process the legislature has participated in, that encourages towns to come forward with proposals, which is what the BMGI was designed to promote in partnership with providers. To understand then what is that full build out? And I think through this process, Madam Chair, I think we have learned there's been a more disclosure of what those dollars are, 25 million and 40 million that are known today. Can you add something more to that as to what those decisions might be. You said by June, the end of the second quarter, you might know further about IIJA funding. What would that be so that the towns that are active not receiving funding in this next round to solve their overall needs, so that as they come forward with their proposals, public hearings that they need to hold between the second quarter of 23 and the end of calendar 23, I'm trying to then get that picture that you can paint for us as to how deep the bucket is going to be. And it's more than $65 million.
That's correct. Yeah. And so I guess in terms of the process, is that sort of where you're going with this? Like how we're going to proceed or?
I'm looking for a dollar amount. How you can put a border on that border amount, that amount. Clearly, it's no less than $65 million.
Are you talking, so
But
the amount of money we
potentially
expect to
it's-
see under IIJA?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I might let Mark answer that question. He's been really in communication with U.S. Treasury way more than I have. So he might have some insight for you on that.
Yes. So it's a separate program. So Capital Projects Fund is through U.S. Treasury. The infrastructure bill is NTIA and the FCC working together. They have that program, BEAD program, which is the major funding source for that program, is $42.5 billion nationwide. Every state is going to receive a minimum of $100 million. We don't know what that final allocation is going to be. They're going to tell us that sometime in mid to late June of 2023. So that number could be higher. We don't know. So but to do what we're doing, we have to stay with, I think, the most conservative number we can and treat it as $100 million. So you would have that $40 million commitment. There's still $60 million minimum that we could look at for other avenues. And those funding mechanisms are for unserved, then underserved, and what's called Tier 3 is connecting anchor institutions. So working with communities to determine other areas to make sure that communities are connected beyond just locations, but working with the communities to determine what some of their needs are.
And the timing for, Madam Chair?
Please,
and
go
the
ahead.
timing then that you see for subsequent rounds would be what?
The census, you get the number in June of 2023. We have been getting an indication from the feds that we're in the right track moving forward with everything. So my sense is by the end of 2023, we should be being able to utilize those funds for additional programs. And these funds, I believe, go until 2028. So whatever that number may be, and like I said, if it's 100 or 120 or whatever that may be, we'll have a better sense. When that happens, we can let you know that because we do that quarterly report for fiscal to get that information out. We can include that information in part of that report. So then when we know more, we can tell you all.
Thank you.
And I can call you directly because you won't be on this committee anymore if you want.
Thank you.
Representative Edwards, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm generally in support of this. I'm not voting today, but as I'm listening to this, we heard a description from Representative Leishman that we still have places out there relying on dial-up. And I think it's going to be great when those dial-up places get 100 meg by 100 meg. But the technologists I've been talking to suggest that we're going to be going to an 8 gig standard in 2025 or 26. It'll be rolled out nationally with 5 gig down, 3 gig up, which will be amazing. That'll support all kinds of 3D applications and immersive technologies. And so my question for you is, as we're investing this money now, are we basically going from sort of a horse and buggy era to a Model T era, right when we see, the interstate highway system getting ready to be rolled out? Are we anticipating, will this technology deployment support the emerging 8 gig standard, not the 100 meg, but the 8 gig?
So in Senate Bill 85, and then the BMGI law, one of the things that was put in there is that we need to look at least what the next steps are. How do we get everybody to at least 1 gig? That was more, I don't know if it was aspirational or, but look for strategies to get to us to that point. So it's not quite the 5 and 3, but it certainly was an indication from this legislature to look to the next steps. So during our process, not only did we meet with all of the providers of landline, of ground fiber wired, but we also met with Starlink. We also met with Project Kuiper, which is Amazon. We've met with a lot of different people to kind of give us a sense of what are the next steps. And we hear that. And so the great part about it is like, yeah, you could go from there. You could go to even higher. We're hearing the different companies saying, well, these technologies bring us all the way up to 2 gig right now. So what can we do for more than that? I think where BEAD is going to come into play, and the connecting anchor institutions talks about what you're looking to do, because then you're going to have hospitals. You're going to be looking at that sort of, for example, hospitals, if they have to send x-rays or some very intense documents, they want us to be looking at that. We talked to the telehealth people about that. So we have to keep an eye on that. And I think our process through BEAD and the IIJA will be to do that and keeping track of that sort of thing. And that's why I think they've also extended it to 2028. So we'll certainly be trying to stay on not necessarily the bleeding edge, but the cutting edge of where things stand.
Yes, you may. One.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I just want to put something away in my memory bank on this. What I think I'm hearing you say is that, yes, you're aware of the emerging gains that we're seeking in our broadband bandwidth. But what I'm not hearing directly is that, yes, you believe that the technologies we're investing in and deploying are going to be inherently capable of that, because I'm concerned that if we aren't inherently capable of meeting that next technology wave, then we will be back here in 5 years looking for another $200 million. So I just want to make sure we're investing in a flexible way, or a way that will support the future.
I believe the way that we're doing it, and the Fed's using their guidance, and we've been using it, we're future-proofing the internet for the state of New Hampshire. So yes, I believe the technologies will get us to those places. I believe that the infrastructure will get us there.
Yes, Senator Daniels.
Thank you. I think we've established that there are contingencies out there, some with no service and some that are underserved, slower speeds. We've also established that the money that's being requested today will not cover everyone. So my question is about the process of selecting. In your selection process as to where this money is to be used, could you talk a little bit about how that's going to be used when you compare the underserved versus the no service? Is one going to have a priority over the other?
So in the RFP process, we were leaving it to the applicants to determine those areas, and so that way we weren't necessarily picking the winners or losers. So we were going to let everyone apply, and then we go through the verification process and do what needed to be done in that way. BMGI will be municipalities working directly with the providers themselves in a local area to make those determinations as well. And what's going to be great is that the municipalities will have a say in working with whom they decide to work with. So those questions can be answered by them. And for us, we'll be providing the resources based upon the application and making sure everything is approved and that the scoring requirements are met. But those things will have happened at the municipal level between the towns and the providers.
Thank you.
I do have one. Are there any further questions? I do have one quick question. When I read the RFP, it indicated the proposals had to be in by the 28th. Can you tell me how many people applied or whatever?
I can say how many. 3.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Seeing no further questions, will the clerk please call the roll? We have a motion. Yeah, yeah. The Leishman Bradley motion at the very beginning so that we could discuss it with a motion on the floor. Okay?
Emmerich votes yes. Representative Erf,
Yes.
Representative Leishman,
Yes.
Representative Lynn,
Yes.
Senator Daniels,
Yes.
Senator Moore, Senator Bradley,
Yes.
Senator Gray,
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald,
Yes.
Senator Khan,
Yes.
Representative Umberger.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the vote is 10-0 in favor.
The vote being 10-0, the replacement FIS 22404 passes. And I just want to thank everybody for coming out to this meeting today. And I want to thank BEA for the work that they were accomplished in the last week or two, with Thanksgiving interrupting a lot of what was going on. So there will be no other fiscal committee meeting in the month of December. I can see big smiles from people that may be serving on it next year. So our first fiscal committee meeting will be in January sometime. So with nothing else, I will, oh, yes, Senator Bradley.
I think it's really important that we all pay tribute to you, Madam Chair, to Senator Daniels, to Senator Khan, for the work that you've done for all these years. I think it's exemplary, and we're going to miss you, and thank you, the three of you, very much.
You're welcome. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I echo those sentiments. And I'd also like to thank the LBA for their always stellar work in staffing this committee.
Okay, I would just like to wish everyone a very happy holiday season and get some rest and relaxation and be ready to hit the road running January 2nd. So thank you very much. Have a good day. Adjourn.